The pillory was a simple thing. It was usually made of wood, strong wood, like oak, because it had to last. It stood in the most public part of town. This was often the market square, or maybe right outside the main church. Sometimes it was set up at a major crossroads. The point was for everyone to see it, and for everyone to see the person locked inside it. Its design was straightforward. There was a tall, thick post set firmly in the ground. At the top of this post was a wooden frame. This frame was made of two horizontal boards, one on top of the other. The boards were hinged on one side so they could open and close. The craftsman who built it would carve out three holes, a large one in the middle for the head, and two smaller ones on either side for the wrists. When it was time to punish someone, the constable would lead the person to the pillory. The top board would be swung open, the offender would be forced to bend over and put their head and hands through the holes in the bottom board. And then the top board would be swung shut. A pin or a padlock would lock it in place. Now the person was trapped, they were held fast, forced to stand bent forward for hours. People often confuse the pillory with the stocks. They were similar, but they punished different parts of the body. The stocks were a low wooden frame, set on the ground. It had holes for the ankles. A person in the stocks would be sitting, maybe on a small bench, or just on the ground. Their feet were locked in place. It was uncomfortable and humiliating. But the pillory was worse. In the pillory, you could not sit. You had to stand. Your body was held in a stooped, unnatural position. Your head was pushed forward, your arms were stretched out, your neck and back muscles would scream with pain after just a short time. You couldn't swat a fly from your face. You couldn't shield your eyes from the sun. You couldn't protect yourself from anything. You were completely helpless. Some pillories were built to hold more than one person. A town might have a pillory with 2 or even 3 sets of holes. This was for when multiple people were sentenced for the same crime. They would be locked in side by side, sharing their shame. Some designs were more elaborate. A rich town might have a pillory built on a raised stone platform, making the offender even more visible. Sometimes a small roof was built over it, but this was rare. It wasn't meant to be a comfortable experience. Rain, sun, or snow, the punishment went on. On the pillory itself, a sign might be nailed up. It would explain the crime. It might say for selling rotten fish or a known liar. This made sure nobody in the crowd was confused about why the person was there. The crime was made as public as the punishment. The device was part of the landscape of a medieval town. It was a permanent fixture. When it wasn't being used, it stood empty. It was a constant, silent warning. It reminded everyone of the rules of the community. It showed what happened when you broke those rules. Children might play around it. People would gather near it to trade gossip. It was a normal part of their world. But everyone knew its purpose. It was not just wood and iron. It was an instrument of social control. It was a stage for public shame, and when its wooden jaws closed around someone's neck and wrists, their life was changed forever. The physical pain was temporary. The memory of the shame would last a lifetime. Why use a pillory? It seems like a strange way to punish someone. We think of punishment as fines or jail time or maybe physical pain like a whipping. The pillory did involve physical pain, but that was not its main purpose. The real punishment was shame. Public humiliation was the goal. To understand this, you have to understand the medieval world. People lived in small, tight-knit communities. Your reputation was everything. It was more valuable than money. Your reputation determined if people would trade with you, if they would help you in a time of need, if your children could find a good marriage. It was your social currency. If you lost your good name, you lost your place in the world. The pillory was a tool designed to destroy a person's reputation. The crimes that landed you in the pillory were usually not the most serious ones. Murder, treason, or serious theft would get you a hanging or a different, more severe punishment. The pillory was for social crimes. It was for people who had cheated or disrupted the community. A very common crime was cheating in business. Think of a baker who used false weights to sell smaller loaves of bread for the full price. Or a brewer who watered down their ale. Or a butcher who sold rotten meat. These were crimes against everyone. The baker didn't just cheat one person, he cheated the whole town. When he was put in the pillory, a loaf of his bad bread might be hung around his neck. The community could see him and his crime, they would remember his face, they would not trust him again. Lying was another serious offense. Perjury, which is lying under oath in court, was a sure way to end up in the pillory. Bearing false witness could ruin someone's life, so it was punished harshly in the public square. Spreading malicious gossip or slander could also be punished this way. Words had power, and using them to harm others was a crime against the social fabric. Minor fraud, petty theft, and public drunkenness were also on the list. Forgery was another one. Anything that broke the trust that held the community together was a candidate for this type of punishment. It was a way for the town to regulate itself. It wasn't just the lord or the king enforcing the law. It was the community itself saying, we don't do this here. This is not how we treat each other. The punishment was a spectacle. It was a form of public theater. The sentencing would happen in a court, but the real judgment was delivered in the town square. The authorities would lead the offender to the pillory, lock them in, and then step back. The community took over. The pillory was a way of physically cutting someone out of the community for a few hours. They were on display, an object to be looked at, not a person to be talked to. They were an outcast. This idea of shame as a tool is important. The hope was that the experience would be so terrible, so deeply humiliating, that the person would never commit the crime again. They would be shamed into good behavior, and it was a warning to everyone else. Every person who walked through the market square and saw the poor soul locked in the pillory got the same message. This could be you. This is what happens when you cheat your neighbors. The punishment was also seen as a form of justice. The offender had to face the very people they had wronged. The baker had to look at the faces of the hungry families he had cheated. The liar had to endure the taunts of the people whose trust he had broken. It was a direct, raw form of accountability. There was no hiding in a jail cell. Your shame was out in the open, for all to see. And in the medieval mind, that was a powerful and just punishment. Imagine what it was really like. The experience didn't start at the pillory. It started with the sentence. The magistrate reads your name and your crime. You are to be placed in the pillory for 3 hours, starting at noon. Your stomach drops. You know what this means. A constable grabs your arm. He walks you from the courthouse or the jail. The walk itself is a parade of shame. People stop and stare. Children point. Whispers follow you through the streets. You can feel a crowd starting to gather. They are not coming to support you. They are coming for the show. You arrive at the market square. There it is, the familiar wooden post. You've seen it 100 times, but it looks different now. It looks like a monster. The constable unlocks the top board. The wood scrapes as it opens. He shoves your head and hands into the curved slots. The wood is rough against your skin. It smells of old rain and dirt. Then, the slam of the top board coming down. The click of the lock. You are trapped. The first thing you notice is the physical pain. It starts almost immediately. Your body is bent in a way it was never meant to be. Your neck is craned forward. Your arms are stretched out, your shoulders ache, your back begins to spasm, you try to shift your weight to find a more comfortable position, but you can't. There is nowhere to go. The sun beats down on your head, or maybe it's cold, and the rain trickles down your face and into your eyes. You can't wipe it away. Then the crowd starts. At first, it's just voices, jeers, and insults. Thief. Liar. Cheat. They shout your crime over and over. They know you. These are your neighbors. The woman you buy milk from. The man you drink with at the tavern. Their children who play with your children. Today, they are your tormentors. Their faces are twisted with anger and disgust. Or worse, with amusement. You are their entertainment for the afternoon. Then, things start to fly. It begins with soft things. Rotten vegetables. A mushy tomato explodes against your cheek. The juice runs down your face. An old cabbage head hits your back. People laugh. Then comes the filth. Mud. Animal dung scooped up from the street. It stinks. It gets in your hair, in your mouth. You try to turn your head away, but you can't. You are a fixed target. Sometimes it got worse. People threw rocks or sharp stones. A rock could cut your head open. It could break your nose or knock out a tooth. This was the real danger of the pillory. The authorities locked you in, but the crowd decided how much you would suffer. If the crowd was truly angry, the pillory could become a death sentence. People did die in the pillory, either from injuries caused by the mob or from exposure to the elements. The helplessness was the worst part. You could do nothing to defend yourself. You could only stand there and take it. You couldn't even see everyone. Your vision was limited. You would hear a shout from the left, then feel something wet and foul hit your right side. The noise was constant. The shouting, the laughing, the sound of things hitting the wood around you. The hours crawled by. Each minute felt like an hour. Each hour felt like a lifetime. When the time was finally up, the constable would return. He would unlock the frame. Now your body would be stiff and sore. You would practically fall to the ground when released. You would be covered in filth, bruised, maybe bleeding, but the physical ordeal was over. The constable would escort you away, back to the jail or to your home. The crowd would drift away, their entertainment finished. But for you, it wasn't over. You had to live in that town. You had to face those people again tomorrow. The filth could be washed off, the bruises would heal, but the shame would stick to you like a second skin. That was the real lasting wound of the pillory. The pillory was a strange instrument of justice because the authorities were not fully in control of it. A judge could sentence a person to stand in the pillory for an hour, but the judge could not control what happened during that hour. During that power belonged to the crowd. The pillory was a stage, and the townspeople were both the audience and the actors. Their reaction was the most important part of the punishment. When the crowd hated the offender, the experience was brutal. This was usually the case for crimes that directly harmed the community. The baker who sold underweight bread had cheated everyone. The man who poisoned the town well had endangered every family. In these cases, the crowd's anger was real and personal. They felt they had a right to punish the offender directly. They were taking back what was stolen from them, not in money, but in honor and pain. They threw the worst things they could find: rocks, dead animals, the contents of chamber pots. It was their way of showing their outrage. The authorities often just stood back and let it happen. This was part of the process, but the crowd's reaction was not always predictable. Sometimes, the public did not agree with the verdict. They might believe the person was innocent, or they might think the crime was justified, or perhaps the offender was a popular figure and the authorities who sentenced him were disliked. In these cases, the pillory could backfire completely on the government. Instead of a scene of punishment, it could become a scene of celebration. Instead of jeers, the person in the pillory might be met with cheers. Instead of being pelted with rocks and filth, they might be given flowers. People in the crowd might bring them a cup of ale or a piece of bread, holding it to their lips so they could eat or drink. The pillory, meant to be a symbol of shame, could become a platform of honor. A famous example of this happened long after the medieval period, but it shows the principle perfectly. In the early 1700s, the writer Daniel Defoe was sentenced to the pillory for writing a political pamphlet that angered the government. He was a popular figure, and many people agreed with his ideas. When he was taken to the pillory, the crowd did not jeer him. They surrounded the pillory to protect him. They threw flowers instead of stones. They drank to his health. The government intended to humiliate him, but the crowd turned him into a public hero. The punishment failed. It actually made him more popular, and the government looked foolish. This made the pillory a risky tool for the authorities. If they misjudged the public mood, it could stir up dissent rather than enforce order. It revealed the limits of their power. They could put a person's body in the stocks, but they couldn't control the people's hearts and minds. The pillory was like a public opinion poll. The reaction of the crowd told you what they really thought about the law, the crime, and the criminal. This dynamic made every punishment unique. The man who abused an animal might get a rougher treatment than a petty thief. A tax collector, even if he was just doing his job, might face a very angry crowd if taxes were high. A religious dissenter might be hailed as a martyr by his followers or pelted with stones by his enemies. The same crime, committed by two different people in two different towns, could result in two completely different experiences. So, the pillory was more than just a punishment handed down from above. It was an interactive event. It was a dialogue between the rulers and the ruled, even if it was a messy and sometimes violent one. The final verdict on the person's character was not delivered by the judge in a courtroom. It was delivered by the ordinary people in the town square, and their verdict was written with cheers and flowers, or with stones and mud. For centuries, the pillory was a common sight in towns across Europe. It was a core part of the justice system. But things began to change. Over time, people's ideas about justice, punishment, and human dignity started to shift. The pillory, once seen as a normal and necessary tool, began to look cruel and outdated. The biggest shift came with the period known as the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. Thinkers started to question old traditions. They talked about individual rights and the idea that punishment should be humane. The concept of cruel and unusual punishment began to take hold. Forcing a person to stand helpless while a mob throws things at them started to seem less like justice and more like barbarism. People began to see the offender not just as a criminal, but as a human being. At the same time, governments were changing. The states were becoming more centralized and powerful. They wanted more control over the justice system. The pillory was messy and unpredictable. The authorities didn't like that the crowd had so much power over the punishment. Justice was supposed to be orderly and professional, delivered by the state, not by an angry mob. A town square riot, even one directed at a convicted criminal, was still a riot. It was a breakdown of public order, which was the opposite of what the punishment was supposed to achieve. The rise of the modern prison system was another major factor. Before this, there weren't many options for punishment. You could find someone, whip them, hang them, or humiliate them publicly. Prisons were mostly just holding cells for people awaiting trial. But as large, organized prisons were built, the idea of incarceration as a punishment took over. Locking someone away in a cell for a set period of time seemed like a more controlled, civilized, and effective way to deal with criminals. It removed them from society, punished them through the loss of freedom, and didn't rely on the whim of a crowd. Public attitudes also changed. As towns grew into cities, the tight-knit communities of the medieval period began to break down. In a large city, you didn't know everyone. The person in the pillory might be a complete stranger. The personal connection was lost. The shame of being seen by your neighbors was less powerful if your neighbors didn't know who you were. The punishment became less about community justice and more about simple, ugly violence. It started to seem less like a civic duty and more like a cruel form of entertainment. So the pillory began to fade away. Laws were passed to limit its use. It was reserved for fewer and fewer crimes. In England, for example, its use was heavily restricted in the early 1800s, and it was formally abolished in 1837. Other countries followed a similar path. The wooden frames were torn down from the market squares where they had stood for generations. They became relics of a past that now seemed distant and brutal. But has the idea of the pillory truly disappeared? We no longer lock people in wooden frames, but we still have a way of punishing people with public shame. Think of social media. When someone makes a mistake or says the wrong thing, their name and face can be spread across the internet in minutes. A digital mob can form. Thousands of strangers can send messages of hate and anger. People can lose their jobs, their friends, and their reputation over a single post. This new form of public shaming is different in many ways. It's not physical, it's global, not local. But the core idea is the same. It uses public humiliation as a weapon. It bypasses the formal justice system. And the punishment is delivered by a crowd, which can be just as unpredictable and merciless as any medieval mob. The wooden pillory is gone from our town squares, but the human desire to expose, judge, and shame others in public is still very much with us. The stage has changed, but the play is often the same.